Have you been skeptical about what we teach on this channel? That how we think about our sleep matters much more than what actually unfolded during the night? Or have you believed that this may be true, but you've been concerned about the lack of scientific evidence? In either of these cases, definitely stay tuned for this episode of Heard Online. It is the most wonderful article I think I have ever read in mainstream media. If you've become skeptical of our ways, you may very well find this article to convert you. And if you have been a believer, but you've been concerned about the lack of scientific evidence, well, here it is. Welcome to another episode of your favorite show on the World Wide Web, Heard Online, a series of investigative videos where we look at claims made about sleep on the internet to see if these claims are true or not. And this is a special episode because we are actually going to read through the entire article. Yes, you heard me, the entire article. It's not super long, but this is probably going to be a fairly long episode. But as I read through this amazing article, I felt like I have to share all this. This is all incredible. And a quick backstory. Why are we doing this now? Well, the article we're going to look at is fairly recent. It came out about 2 weeks ago, or less actually, like 10 days ago or something like that. And it all started with me getting a text from our friend Martin Reed. Yes, the Martin Reed, Insomnia coach Martin Reed, who happens to live, believe it or not, 20 minutes away from where I live. Anyways, he just sent me a text saying the voices are getting louder, and then a link to the article we are going to look at. And I thought I knew exactly what Martin was talking about. We have been discussing that if you look back like 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, pretty much everything you learned or heard in mainstream media about sleep was some form of scaremongering. It was like, oh, if you don't get enough sleep, this happens, this happens, this happens. Like there was very little that didn't make you feel really sad and depressed, honestly, about the voices out there. But in the past, maybe year and a half or so, there has been much less of that scaremongering that was so pervasive before. And there have been new voices, new ideas. Like there is something of like, a breath of fresh air. Like there's something new in the way sleep is being discussed. And when he said the voices are getting louder, I was like, this is probably something that is quite nice and reveals something new in the mainstream media. And you know what? I was honestly shocked when I read this article, because usually you read an article where, oh, this is nice, but oh, this part was a little problematic. I wish they hadn't said this, right? In this article, there was virtually nothing that I didn't wholeheartedly agree with, but there is a bit of a plot twist in the end. There is something kind of interesting in the end. So hope you stay with me for that one. Anyways, let's jump in here and look at the article. It is from BBC. And it's an article published on October 14th, 2024. And the title goes, "Need a good night's sleep? ? Try changing how you think about it." Already there in the headline, you see that, okay, this is something new. This is something we never hear about in kind of mainstream reporting. And it's written by Amanda Ruggieri. Huge kudos to Amanda Ruggieri. In fact, I'm going to try to find Amanda on Twitter or something like that and just say thank you. Anyways, it starts off like this. Our hectic modern lives can often leave us feeling sleep deprived, but what if much of a good night's sleep was down to our state of mind? Again, kind of like, makes you really curious, like, oh, what's this? What's this? This is new. We never hear anything like this, right? And then the article goes on. How did you sleep last night? ? If you tossed and turned or stared at the clock, it's likely you'll probably feel less than refreshed, but that groggy, tired feeling may not just be down to the quantity or perhaps even the quality of your sleep. It can also depend on your mindset, because what you tell yourself the next day about how you slept and how much it matters can make a difference to how you perceive your tiredness. And when I read this, the first read through, I actually just got to the end of this paragraph. I'm like, wow. And I was like, the BBC has discovered emotional fatigue. And emotional fatigue is how we explain how you can feel so incredibly drained and fatigued and like dysfunctional after a choppy night's sleep. And we explain this as being the result of how we think about that night. If we think, oh my gosh, this means I'm broken, this means I'm damaged, this means I will never sleep again, this means something is wrong with me, then those thoughts can make us feel really, really heavy and sad and like super tired, like to the core tired, like this deep emotional fatigue that has nothing to do actually with how much we slept. So yeah, just a little quick review of emotional fatigue, but that's exactly what is described in this article. So that, you know, at first look, I was like, wow, BBC has discovered emotional fatigue. Let's keep reading. Everybody knows the idea of sleep quality. They assume that it is based on people's sleep performance during the night as something you can measure, says Nicole Tang. And I think this is so on the spot, because when we hear sleep quality, we immediately think of like measurements like how long did it take you to fall asleep, how many minutes did you sleep, what was your WASA, what was your like wakefulness after sleep onset, how much REM did you get, etc., etc. But Dr. Tang says no. In fact, Nicole Tang, director for the Warwick Sleep and Pain Lab at the University of the Warwick in the UK, says, but what happened afterwards and what happened just before could also have an influence. And I actually clicked this link, which was to an article that was like from 2017. And I reviewed the entire article because I thought this article in the BBC was based on kind of a recent scientific study, which it wasn't. So I kind of spent a lot of time reviewing that for no particular reason, but it was somewhat interesting. Anyway, Tang's own work in this area is part of a growing body of research that suggests sleeping through the night isn't the only key to feeling refreshed in the morning. Again, Amanda says growing body of research, suggesting kind of what me and Martin feel, that there's this kind of new wave of thinking in the sleep world, which is incredible. Our perception of sleep, our mood when assessing how tired we are and what we are doing at the time can make all the difference, Tang and her colleagues say. The idea that mindset directly affects our sleep isn't new. Decades of research have largely agreed that, in fact, psychological processes are likely the main driver behind insomnia. Again, this is a very nice section that is underlined here, highlighting that, yes, it is. Insomnia is a way we experience anxiety. Insomnia is essentially sleep anxiety. Insomnia is something that happens when we have been hyper-aroused for any reason. Now, they don't go into like what we think is actually the core, which is that it's essentially a phobia of being awake at night, but still highlighting that insomnia is a psychological phenomenon, not a disorder or a condition or something like that. I think was super nice to read. Let's keep reading. Our sleep is disrupted when we're in an elevated state of psychological arousal. They're basically describing hyperarousal here, which often results from our thoughts, beliefs, and how we focus our attention. Still, many of us would assume that if we feel tired, it's because we slept poorly, tossing and turning all night, unable to fall into the kind of rejuvenating slumber we all hope for. Exactly. We have an idea that it is a certain type of sleep, like deep, refreshing, consolidated sleep, that makes us feel refreshed. But as the article says, that's not the entire story at all. Let's keep reading. For decades, however, a phenomenon called paradoxical insomnia has puzzled scientists. This is where people believe they have had a poor night of sleep, feel fatigue, and yet when their sleep is objectively measured, such as with polysomnography, aka sleep study, it is within normal range. This state may be more common than people realize. Some research suggests it could apply to the majority of insomnia cases. One systematic review of studies identified the findings of prevalence among insomnia patients as ranging from 8% to 66%. Now, when you see 8% to 66%, you know that's a huge range, which leads me to think that there is kind of probably a lot of differences in terms of like defining paradoxical insomnia. But just to stay on this for kind of general educational purposes, what I think of as like classic paradoxical insomnia is when somebody says, I didn't sleep a wink last night. I might have gotten 1 hour. And you look at their sleep study and it's like textbook, like they slept 6-7 hours, something like that. And that, I believe, is not very, very common, and definitely not something that most people struggling with insomnia have. But, and I think they'll talk a little bit more about this in the BBC article, it is very, very well known that if you take a bunch of random people and you ask people like, do you think you have problem sleeping? Those who say yes will underestimate how much they sleep when you look at it objectively, and those who say I have no problem sleeping will overestimate. In both cases, with about 1 hour. So we humans subjectively sleep somewhere around 6.5 hours per night. But those who don't have any struggle with sleep will say I slept 7.5 hours, and those who have a sleep struggle will say that they slept like 5.5 hours. So there's definitely a component of this paradoxical insomnia in general, with all insomnia, I believe. So just a little a commentary on this topic of paradoxical insomnia. To be clear, let's keep reading. To be clear, insomnia and its potential risks are very real. Now, this is the one sentence where I went like, I wish they hadn't said that. But when you click this link where it says potential risk, it does not take you to some place where they talk about like cancer and like heart disease or dementia. No, it takes you to an article where they talk about how sleep disruption could be something you see before someone has before someone is, let's say, diagnosed with like a mental health condition, right? So, for example, they're saying that you can see sleep disruption before somebody's actually diagnosed with depression. And to me, that's just like, yeah, maybe, we have something kind of building up inside us. Some inner struggle is building up inside us, and pretty early on, we are a little bit hyper aroused and we have some sleep struggle. Yeah, that could very well be the case, right? But that it's not, again, if they think of this as like the potential risk, I think they're very, very far from the kind of scaremongering and the typical really scary narratives that are so pervasive. So I thought this kind of like made this sentence much more appetizing. Let's keep reading. And no one would argue that if you consistently feel tired, you shouldn't make whatever tweaks to your sleep that you can. Okay, but the idea that how we view a bad night's sleep could change how tired we feel is an intriguing and potentially empowering consideration at best. It means you might be able to feel more awake without having to clock up more hours of shut-eye. And I loved this sentence. I absolutely love this sentence because this is exactly why we talk so much about how our thoughts about sleep is what matters, not exactly how we sleep. And why do we do that? Because if we think, using their language here, that we have to clock up more hours of shut-eye to feel more refreshed, it leads towards performance anxiety. It leads to us trying more gadgets, more sleep hygiene, more rituals, more rules, etc., which makes us more pressure to sleep, which means more struggle sleeping, which makes us feel, that things are even more difficult for us, right? So I loved what the author of this study pointed to, which is, again, that if we think it's more like our mindset, then that can lead to us thinking like, oh, so I don't have to tweak or change my sleep or clock up more hours. And that leads to less pressure to sleep, which means leads to sleeping easier. Let's keep reading. The problem of sleep problems. This approach can conflict with what we're often told about sleep, namely that consistently logging a certain number of hours without wakes is absolutely crucial to well-being. One of the main ideas driving a $78 billion and growing industry. In fact, experts say the exact relationship between sleep duration and our long-term health remains unclear. And when you hear this wording, from like a scientist or the scientific world, it's the same thing as it means the same thing as we haven't found anything. We haven't seen any evidence that this causes this. It remains unclear, which is exactly the same we say all the time over and over again, which is when people ask like, hey, doesn't insomnia cause dementia? We're like, there's no evidence to back up the claim. There's no evidence behind that, which is the same thing as that remains unclear. Nobody has proven that. There's no evidence for that. Loved this as well. Let's keep reading. The reason, and this is also exactly what we say. The research tends to be mixed, and even when a link is found, studies generally highlight association between sleep and health rather than causations. In other words, the lack of sleep could be the cause of the problem, could be, or it could be down to an underlying issue that keeps someone from sleeping well. People with respiratory problems, for example, often suffer poor sleep. Another amazing point. If somebody has like COPD, right? Let's say they have significant COPD, they're like essentially breathing at this inflated state of the lungs all the time, and they have sleep struggles. We wouldn't go like, oh, so yeah, their sleep problem caused their COPD. Of course not. We'd be like, is there any surprise that these people with COPD have sleep struggles? Of course not. We'd be like, of course the COPD is causing some sleep struggles. It would be surprising if it didn't. And this can really explain all the links that you see between like sleep and some health issue, because that health issue is very, very, very likely to cause sleep disruption, right? Much more than the other way around. So again, an amazing point. I've lost track of how many amazing points this article makes, but this is so wonderful. And again, the benefit of this is like when we no longer worry about little sleep causing health issues, then there's less pressure to sleep, less worry about sleep, and sleep happens easier and easier. Let's keep going. We're problematizing our sleep, says David Samson, an evolutionary anthropologist and director of the Sleep and Human Evolution Lab at the University of Toronto, as well as an author of the forthcoming book, The Sleepless Ape, the strange and unexpected story of how social sleep made us human. Interesting. I probably will get that book and read it. By using objective measures such as actigraphy, which monitors activity and rest cycles, he and other researchers have found that people from hunter-gatherer societies typically get between 5.7 and 7.1 hours of sleep per night, exactly as what we typically find in the Western world. Like people sleep about 6 hours, something like that, on the lower end of the scale compared to industrial societies. Okay, their sleep is also more fragmented. Okay, so they make the case that in hunter-gatherer societies, they sleep slightly less and their sleep is more fragmented. By the way, if you click this link, you get to an article by Yetish Gandhi that we have reviewed in Heard Online, one of my favorite articles. Anyways, let's keep going. But it also doesn't bother them. And when he says them, he refers to the hunter-gatherers who sleep in a more fragmented way than us. And according to the article here, sleeps a little less than us. But it doesn't bother them, says Samson. Of the two groups he looked at, in Namibia and Bolivia, less than 3% of foragers said they had trouble sleeping or staying asleep, a fraction of up to 30% reported in industrial societies. Neither group had a word for insomnia in their languages. When I asked them, are they happy about their sleep? Are they satisfied with their sleep? Is sleep okay? However you try and get at this question, 9.5 out of 10 say, yeah, I love my sleep. Samson says, yet we know quantitatively that these foragers in the small scale societies are sleeping less than those in the economically developed world. We have a narrative in the West that humans have never been more sleep deprived. He said, it is total rubbish. And again, I love this part too. It has all these claims that, since the Industrial Revolution and artificial lights, we're sleeping less and less and less. No, there's nothing backing that up at all. And also this notion that we are sleep deprived, and because of that we don't feel well, etc. Not backed up at all. And this is so nicely illustrated with these hunter-gatherers who just go like, yeah, I love my sleep, because for those hunter-gatherers, they probably not gotten to a point in sort of the evolution of society where they can even start to think that something is wrong with my sleep. I should sleep more. I'm not getting enough sleep, because they're not measuring hours or minutes. They're not objectifying their sleep. They're not comparing their sleep with somebody else. It's just like, breathing is for us. It's just something that happens. Imagine some anthropologist from a different planet came and asked you like, how do you feel about your breathing? And you'd be like, it's great. Because we haven't gotten to a point where we start to think like, oh, my breath should be like 8 seconds in and 4 seconds out. And like, no, it's just something that happens, right? All right, let's keep going. And there's more. Honestly, just gets better and better. Samson is one of a growing number of researchers. I love this again, a growing number of researchers pushing against the idea of universal rules for exactly how much sleep we all must get. In one recent academic article, for example, researchers at the University of Oslo question the idea that we're experiencing an epidemic of sleeplessness. They point out that laboratory experiments, which have given rise to the concerns that poor sleep inhibits health, are very different different than real life findings. Very, very interesting. And again, this kind of growing research narrative is like music to my ears. Sleep needs should be regarded as a dynamic thing with the potential to adapt in response to environmental circumstances, the researcher write, which is another way of saying that it's not like we need exactly the same amount night per night. It depends on all kinds of things in our lives, how much we sleep from one night to the other. It's a dynamic thing. This means that there is not an optimal amount of sleep for an individual across situations and times. Rather, sleep is a negotiable quantity that is affected by environmental, cultural, psychological, and physiological factors, which must be balanced against competing needs and opportunities for various behaviors. Kind of same thing I said, but a little bit longer worded. Let's keep going to the next heading, sleep anxieties. Believing there's only one right way to sleep isn't just thus far unfounded, it can also backfire. In other words, they're saying like, not only is this not true, but it can lead to struggle, translated into our language. That includes when we're trying to sleep. People with insomnia tend to have rigid beliefs about sleep. For example, if I don't get 7 hours, I feel terrible tomorrow, and often feel especially fearful of a poor night's sleep. They're also more alert towards sleep-related cues, such as watching the clock. All these thoughts can increase arousal and anxiety at night, making sleep harder to attain. But they can even make a difference the next day, notes Tang, by making people more aware of how much they were awake the day after. It may exacerbate the feelings that they slept poorly, not only making them feel more tired, but also more worried about sleeping that night, continuing a vicious cycle. That cycle being like, you have like a pretty average night of sleep, but you think, oh no, that wasn't enough. You become worried and you have more trouble sleeping, and you think, oh no, this was this also was no good, etc., etc. So not much more to add to this. Again, this just mirrors everything we teach here. Often, however, these beliefs aren't actually based on fact. Those with insomnia tend to think that they require more sleep than is realistically necessary, for example, and to overestimate the impact of poor night's sleep on their functioning. This is what I talked about a little bit before. As a result, traditional treatments of insomnia have tended to focus on cognitive behavioral strategies to shift those thoughts and decrease arousal, such as practicing muscle relaxation. And this little paragraph here is probably the only one that I disagree with. If the traditional treatment for insomnia truly had been cognitive, more of what they describe here as cognitive strategies of like education and letting people fully understand everything that was, for example, in this article, then I would have said things are pretty nice in the traditional space. However, what we know is that in the traditional space, the cognitive behavioral treatment is very heavily focused on behavioral modification of sleep restriction and sleep logs and like sleep scheduling and things of that nature, which is not that helpful. So, I kind of disagree with this sentence, but that's a minor thing. Let's keep going. This approach can help others struggling with sleep disturbances too, like new parents, says Pamela Douglas. And I'm kind of skip over this part because Pamela writes something very wonderful, but it's essentially just the same teachings applied to parents. Let's read this one. Beyond the particular beliefs we have about sleep, the problem is how attached to them we are, says Jason Ong, a longtime sleep researcher at Northwestern University. I actually met Jason Ong when I was a fellow myself at the University of Chicago, and he seemed like a super nice guy. I actually invited him to become a guest on our YouTube channel here, and he said yes, but he had just had a baby himself, so he said maybe later. And then I never reached out to him again, but maybe I should do that now. He seems super nice. And he has a really kind of funny example here. Let's just skip to his example, which I found really enlightening. The day after, focusing too much on sleep doesn't just make it harder to get shut-eye. It can also mean feeling more tired the next day, even if we slept fine. Ong recalls one patient who insisted that they need 6 hours to function. When Ong pointed out a day in his sleep diary where he'd logged 5, the patient told him that it had been daylight savings, but he didn't realize it. Only later, at the end of a gym session, did he realize he slept 5.5 hours, not 6.5. Then he felt exhausted. So this is kind of like a bit comical here, but it illustrates the point that when this person thought they slept 6.5 hours, they felt fine. Then they realized, oh my gosh, it was daylight savings. I actually only got 5.5. Suddenly they felt exhausted, right? Very nice illustration of how it is, how we think about things, not what actually happens, that makes the most difference. This may also, I'm skipping a little bit just for the sake of not making this super long, but let's keep reading this part. This may also mean that the rapid rise of sleep tracking devices could backfire, says Tang and Samson. We understand why. And this is also really interesting. Some research here bears this out. In one study, for example, people with insomnia were given feedback that researchers told them was from sleep data on a smartwatch. Unbeknownst to the participants, the feedback was fake. Half were told that they slept badly, half that they slept well. When they reported back later in the day, the group who were told they'd sleep poorly said they felt more fatigued, less alert, and experienced a worse mood than the group who were told they slept well. Again, making the same point. And there's another very, very similar one here, but let's see. Was this one with performance? Yeah. So I'm just gonna tell you about this one. There's another study where they had people believe that they slept hours or believe that they slept 5 hours, and they checked like their reaction time. And people who believed that they had slept 8 hours had faster reaction times than people who thought they slept 5 hours. So it doesn't only impact kind of how we subjectively feel at any given moment, but even like performance is impacted by how much we thought we slept rather than how we actually slept. Again, the same point of it's how we think about things rather than what actually happens that really, really matters. Now, okay, so now to the kind of twist here. It's not a huge twist, but it is a little bit of a twist here. So far, this article has been like this amazing, enlightening, incredible article. And now we're getting to the point where they're going to discuss like the takeaways. Okay, so if you had trouble sleeping or not felt refreshed, what are the takeaways? Sleep tips. So if you struggle with poor sleep, what can you do? All of the usual tips apply, experts say. For example, practicing good sleep hygiene, which typically includes strategies like avoiding alcohol and caffeine and keeping a regular bedtime. And this part is like, I've loved this article so far. This is a little bit of it's like a slight deflation of the balloon, which is like, oh man. So you're telling people all these wonderful things, but when you want to give some people something practical, like practical takeaways, you're saying like, well, all the usual stuff, like, make sure you don't have too much sound or noise. And then that goes completely against everything you talked about, which is that it's when we feel pressure to sleep that we have trouble sleeping. It's when we're worried about sleep that we have trouble sleeping, right? And the sleep hygiene and all the typical device, actually, they are just sleep efforts. They're just attempts at trying to make sleep happen. And in fact, in the very article, they have talked about how the more we try, the less satisfied we are with sleep, or how the less well we feel like we've slept, right? So, that part was, a little bit of a slight letdown, maybe, but again, in fairness to the author, they just kind of like, the author here is not like a domain expert. They're journalists. They can't just make stuff up. So if everybody tells them, well, the usual sleep steps are what we should do, what can she do? She has to mention that, and she does that in a nice way, like in just one paragraph about that. And then she says, but beyond that, try to adapt a less black and white approach to sleep. Again, focusing on mindset more than anything else. And I felt there was kind of like one last wonderful thing here. Let's read it. Let's read the last paragraph. I'm not saying that sleep is not important to overall physical health and mental health. And by the way, we don't make that claim either. Sometimes people on our channel get the sense that we say like, oh, how much you sleep or how little sleep has absolutely no impact whatsoever in your life. Not true. Of course, if you take any random person and make that person sleep very little, they are going to say that they feel tired. I feel sleepy, a little foggy, hard to focus. So of course it has an impact. Regardless of how we think about sleep, yes, sleeping little has an impact, but it's definitely not, when it comes to the insomnia struggle in particular, definitely not what matters the most. That's kind of what we teach. So again, Tang here says something very similar. But there's a culture where when people talk too much about their sleep duration, they've forgotten the fact that there are so many individual differences and so many circumstantial aspects. And that is causing a lot of unrealistic expectations and guilt and disappointment for lots of people. Huge. This guilt and disappointment is totally what leads to emotional fatigue and struggle. In fact, it has probably been making you feel more tired. How exhausting. And yes, again, making the point about emotional fatigue. So let me know what you thought. I thought this was incredibly refreshing. And I agree with Martin that there seems to be new voices in our space that are different from the ones we heard 5 years ago. And it is wonderful. So let me know in the comment sections what you thought, and we'll go from there. Bye for now. Hi, it's me, Coach Daniel. I hope you found the video you just saw eye-opening and really, really helpful on your path towards peaceful sleep and peace of mind. We at the Sleep Coach School, we try to really do our best to put out a ton of helpful educational content. And if it leads you where you want to be, that is wonderful. In that case, please tell the world about our channel. Hit the like button, subscribe, get other people involved and get them to find our teachings, because that can be so helpful to them. Now, on the other hand, there are some things that are not necessarily available in our free content, and that is community. Leaving the struggle can be quite a lonely journey. You can feel quite isolated. And when you join a community of people who are on their path of leaving insomnia or who have already done so, then your path can be so much easier and lighter. If this sounds like something you'd be interested in, then head over to our website, thesleepcoachschool.com, and you can learn about our Insomnia Immunity program there. And if you decide to join, then we can't wait to see you on the other side.